Hello and welcome to the lesson. And during this lesson, we will discuss arrays. So in this lesson, we'll cover the following topics: creating and initializing arrays, assessing and modifying array elements, iterating through arrays. We'll also discuss common methods for arrays like length, sort, etc. And also we'll discuss multidimensional arrays. So what is an array? An array is a data structure that holds multiple values of the same data type, such as int, double, or string. Each value in the array is called an element, and it is stored in a specific position, referred to as its index. The index of the first element in the array is always 0. In other words, an array is like a list of items where each item is accessible using its position in the list. So in the current slide, you can see a visual representation of an array. So elements from the top are array elements, and from the bottom you can see array indices. So as you can see, the very first element has a value 43, and the index of the first element is 0. For the second one, the value is 1 and the index is also 1. In our case, the array length, it means the amount of elements in the array, is 9. The first index is 0 and the last index is 8. So each element has its own index. To create an array, you use the square brackets after the data type. For example, if we want to create an array of integers, we will write the following: int square brackets integers. So in this example, int is a data type of the array's elements, and integers it's a name of the array. And next, we need to initialize the array by assigning values to it. And there are multiple ways to do this. So let's start from the first approach. We can create an array in the following way. So let's modify this line, and after the array name, we'll specify new int, and then amount of elements this array can hold. In our case, let's specify 5. So this line creates a variable called integers of type array of ints and assigns it a value of array with 5 elements. Let's now print this array. Let's print array of integer elements. And after that, let's print the array. By the way, so if we just specify the array name here, let's run the program and see the output. Since the array is a reference data type, just a reference to the array will be printed. But we want to see a pretty print of the array. So in order to do that, let's use arrays from the Java util package. So don't forget to import Java util arrays. Arrays to string. And here we will specify the array name. So this method just pretty prints an array. So let's rerun the program and see the output. Okay, we can see that the array of integers was successfully printed. And as you can see, only zeros were printed. And I will explain you it a little bit later, so don't worry. And let's do the very same thing for doubles. Let's define one more array of type double. Let's call it doubles, new double, and let's say it will contain only 2 elements. Let's also print it. I will copy paste it because I don't want to waste time. So array of double elements, and we print doubles. Let's do the very same thing for booleans. So we'll specify the array of boolean elements, we'll call it booleans, and we'll print this array to the console. We'll print booleans. And lastly, so let's also print a reference data type, since all of these data types are primitives. And we also want to show that it's possible to create an array of reference data types. So let's create an array of strings. Strings equals new string, and let's say it will contain 4 elements. And for booleans, let's say it will be 3. And lastly, of string elements. Okay, done. So let's describe the following 2 lines. In these 2 lines, we create an array of integers, and this array will be able to store 5 elements. And elements of the array will be initialized with default values. And for numbers, default value is always 0. So for integers and doubles, it will be 0. For booleans, it's false, and for references, it's null. So let's run now the program and see the output. Okay, we can see that all the 4 arrays were successfully printed, and all of them are initialized with default values. So the first array, as we defined it, it contains 5 elements, and here we can see 5 elements, and all of them are initialized with zeros. The second one contains double elements, and since it's a floating point data type, it's printed as 0.0. For booleans, we define the array with 3 elements, and we can see 3 elements with default false values because it's boolean. And for the array of strings, we can see 4 elements, and all of them are nulls, since string is a reference data type. Let's move on. Another way to declare and initialize the array in one line is the following. Int numbers. And now we can immediately initialize this array with values. Let's say we want to store 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. This is another way to initialize an array. So let's print it. Let's say numbers, and then arrays to string numbers. Let's run it and see the output. Okay, so we can see it was initialized with values we specified here. And one more way is to declare the array first and then initialize it separately. For example, let's say we just declared an array here in this line, and in a separate line we can initialize it in the following way. New int, and after that we specify all the values. So let's rerun and see that output didn't change, because this is exactly the same thing. Okay, we can see that output didn't change. And also it's important to note that once an array is created, you cannot change the size of the array. You can only modify the values of the existing elements in the array, but you cannot change the size. So now let's see how we can access and modify the elements in the array. First, let's talk about accessing array elements. To access an element in the array, we use the array's name followed by the index of the element in square brackets. The index starts at 0, so the first element in the array is located at index 0. The second element is located at index 1, and so on. So here's an example. Let's print the first element of this array. Let's print the first element is, and now let's print numbers. This is an array name, and after that we need to specify which exactly element of this array we want to print. Since we want to print the first element and the index of the first element is 0, we specify the 0. So in this line we are saying that we are printing the first element is the element of the numbers array with index 0. So let's run the program and see the output again. and we can see that the first element is 1. And next, let's talk about modifying array elements. To modify an element in an array, we simply use the assignment operator and the index of the element. So here's an example. Let's modify the first element of the numbers array. So we specify the name of the array, the index of the element we want to modify. After that, we use the equals operator to assign a new value to this element, and we specify which exactly value we want to assign. So in this line we are saying, okay, let's take the numbers array, let's take the element with index 0 from this array, and let's assign value 6 to this element. And let's print the first element of the array one more time, and let's say now is, because we updated the element, and let's rerun the program. Okay, so we can see that the first element now is 6. And finally, let's just print an array again, an array with numbers. So we'll see the whole array, and we'll see that now the first element of the whole array is 6. Okay, we can see numbers, and the first element of this array is 6. It's important to note that arrays are fixed in size and cannot be resized after creation. If you need to change the size of an array, you will need to create a new array with the desired size and copy the elements from the old array to the new one. Let's cover one of the most important concepts related to arrays: iterating through arrays. So an array is a collection of elements, and often you'll need to process each element of an array one by one. This is where iteration comes into play. In Java, there are several ways to iterate through an array, and in this video we'll be discussing the most common methods. The first method we'll cover is the for loop. The for loop is the most commonly used loop for iterating through an array. The syntax of the for loop as it follows. You can see it at the example. Here in this syntax, the word array is the name of the array we want to iterate over. Array.length is the number of elements in the array. And I is the index of the current element. The for loop starts with I equals 0. So this is an initialization, and increments I by 1 on each iteration until I is no longer less than array length. Here is an example to demonstrate how to use the for loop to iterate through an array and print each element. So let's define an array. Let's say the name of the array will be just numbers. And let's assign it the value with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so next, let's use the for loop to iterate through the numbers array and to print each element of this array to the console. So we use for, and as you remember, the first part of this loop is the initialization block. So we'll initialize the index variable with value 0. After that, the condition goes. So we say we'll iterate while I is less than numbers.length. So, and the final part is the increment. So we'll increment I by 1. And within the loop body, let's print the element of the numbers array with index I. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It means all of the elements were printed to the console. Another way to iterate through an array is using the for each loop. The for each loop is the shorthand for the for loop. And its syntax is as follows. You can see it at the example 1. So here, element is a variable that takes on the value of each element in the array. The for each loop automatically iterates over each element in the array, and you don't have to worry about the index of the current element. And here is an example to demonstrate how to use the for each loop to iterate through an array and print each element. So we already have defined the array with numbers, and now let's iterate through this array and print every element from this array. So for, after that we specify the type of the element, int, and each element we can define a variable name here for each element. So let's call it just number. And after that we specify the array name, numbers. And as you can see, the syntax is pretty straightforward. And afterwards we just print every number. This loop, it just ignores indexes. We don't need them in this loop. And the only thing we need in for each loop is just to iterate through all of the elements. So let's run the program and see that all of the elements are printed. Okay, all of them are printed to the console. Now let's look at some of the most common methods you'll use when working with arrays in Java. The first one is the length method. The length method returns the number of elements in an array. It's a property of the array, not a method, so it's accessed without any parentheses. And here's an example. Let's define an array with integers, and let's call it numbers as usual, numbers. And it will contain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and now let's print the length of this array. So we'll print the amount of elements in this array. We'll print the length of the array is. And now we'll use number dot length. Okay, so the output of the code above will be the length of the array is 5 because it contains 5 elements. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, it's 5 as expected. So let's move on. Let's now discuss the sort method. The sort method is used to sort the elements of an array in ascending order. It's a static method of the arrays class, so it's accessed by calling arrays.sort and passing in the array you want to sort. So here's an example. Let's define one more array. Let's call it numbers 2, and it will contain the following elements: 5, 2, 1, 4, 3, for example. And now let's use arrays.sort. Don't forget to import Java util arrays to use arrays.sort. And here we'll pass numbers to array. So this line says that we are going to sort the array with name numbers 2. Okay, and let's now print the sorted array. The sorted array is arrays to string numbers 2. Let's run the program and see the output. So now we can see that this array is now sorted and it's correctly printed to the console. Okay, so let's move on. Let's now discuss the binary search method. The binary search method is used to search for a specific element in a sorted array. It returns the index of the element if it's found, or a negative number if it's not found. So like the sort method, it's also a static method of the arrays class. So here's an example. Let's use an existing array with numbers we already have, and let's create a variable called search key equals 4. This is an element we want to find in an array. And let's now do the following. Let's define one more variable and call it index. and we'll assign it the following value: arrays.binary search, and the first parameter is the array, so we'll specify numbers here, and the second one is the search key. So this line says that we are going to use the array binary search method to find the search key in the numbers array, and afterwards we'll assign the result to the index variable. Okay, so let's now modify the code in the following way. If the index is greater than or equal to 0, it means that the element is found because the index is not negative. We'll print the element. After that, we'll use the search key is found at index, and let's print the index now. Okay, and otherwise, if the index is negative, it means that the element is not found in the array. Let's print that it's not found. Is not found. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, so we can see that the element 4 is found at index 3. So there is an array with 5 elements. This one has index 0, 1, 2, 3. So at index 3, we have element with value 4. And we can see the output that the element 4 is found at index 3. And now let's update the search key to something that the array doesn't contain. For example, 999. So 999 doesn't exist in this array in numbers. So we expect to see that it's not found. Let's rerun and see. Okay, so we see that the element 999 is not found at the index -6. -6, it's a negative number returned by the binary search method, and since it's negative, we can understand that it's not found. So these are just a few of many common methods you'll use when working with arrays in Java. And of course, there are many others you can explore, such as the copy-of method, fill method, and so on. Let's discuss multidimensional arrays, also known as matrices. First, let's define what a multidimensional array or matrix is. Simply put, it's an array of arrays. So instead of having a single array with a set number of elements, we have an array of arrays, each of which can have its own set of elements. A multidimensional array is an array that contains arrays. It can be thought of as a table or matrix where each cell of the table contains another array. So on current screen, you see 3 examples. In the first example, we define a 2-dimensional array, and it will be created with default values. So for int, it's 0. So all of the elements will be initialized with zeros during the array creation. This is because the type of elements of the array is int. In the second example, we also create a 2-dimensional array, and we initialize the element with index 2, 1 with the value 8. It means that we assign the value 8 to the element which is located at the row number 2 and column number 1. Please note that here we use indices. So the row with index 2 is actually the third row, and the row with index 1 is actually the second row because we start the enumeration from 0. And in the third example, we also define a 2-dimensional array, but we immediately initialize it with values. To create a 2-dimensional array in Java, we use the following syntax. So let's define an array of ints, and we use 2 pairs of square brackets since it's a 2-dimensional array. After that, we'll need to give a name to this variable. Let's call it matrix, and let's assign it the following value. So let's first use the pair of brackets, and this one will be used for the outer array. And now we want to define several subarrays. So let's define the first one with elements 1, 2, 3, the second one with elements 4, 5, 6, and the last one with elements 7, 9, 8. Okay, so here we have created a 2-dimensional array named matrix with 3 arrays inside, each with 3 elements. We can create any amount of subarrays here, and all of the subarrays can contain any amount of elements. So for instance, we can update it in the following way. So this array will contain only 2 elements. But just for this example, let's use 3 elements. Okay, and now let's print this matrix. And let's use system.out.println matrix. And afterwards, we can't use arrays, just arrays to string, because, okay, let's try to do that and you'll see the output. But we can't do that because, as you can see, the array of references was printed because all of the nested arrays are also references. So what was printed is just an array of references. But we want to print all of the elements, and there is a method within the arrays class to do that. It's called deep to string. So it will go deep to each array and print it one by one. So let's rerun the program and see the output. Okay, so we can see that the array is printed correctly. So let's move on. And to access a specific element in a multidimensional array, we need to provide 2 indices. For example, to access the element 5 from this array, we would write matrix. So, okay, we would write the following. Let's print the following to the console. Element at row equals 1 and column equals 1 is the following. It's matrix of row 1 and column 1. We need to use 2 pairs of brackets. So what is written here? We are printing the element of the matrix at row 1 and column 1. Or you can understand it in a different way. We are printing the element of the matrix at index 1. So what do we have at index 1? At index 1, we have the following array, because this one has index 0, this one subarray has index 1, this one has index 2. So from this subarray with index 1, we also want to print the element with index 1. And 5 has index 1 because 4 has index 0, this one has index 1, and this one has index 2 for this subarray. So let's run the program and see that 5 is now printed to the console. Okay, so we can see that the element at row 1 and column 1 is 5. And we can also modify elements in a multidimensional array. And we can do it in the same way. For example, to change the value of the element at position 1, 1 to 10, we would write the following. Let's copy paste it. Matrix 1, 1 equals 10. So we do almost the same as we did for regular arrays, for 1-dimensional arrays. So for 2-dimensional arrays, we just use 2 pairs of square brackets with 2 indices, and we use the assignment operator to assign value 10 to it. Okay, so let's now do the very same thing and print this element once again. So now it should be 10. Okay, so we can see that it's 10 now. And in addition to two-dimensional arrays, Java also supports arrays with higher dimensions. To create a three-dimensional array, for example, we can use the following syntax. I will just copy paste it. So here is the syntax. Since it's a three-dimensional array, we use 3 pairs of square brackets. And here, within brackets, we define all of the elements of this three-dimensional array. So here we have created a three-dimensional array named myArray with 2 arrays inside, each with 2 arrays, each with 3 elements. Yeah, I know that it's hard to understand, but just try to read it several times and you will get it. So finally, let's print the three-dimensional array, and we'll use system out println as usual, and I'll specify that three-dimensional array. And here we'll use arrays deep to string again and three-dimensional array. Oh, sorry, my array. Yeah. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, so we can see that three-dimensional array was printed to the console. When working with multi-dimensional arrays, it's important to keep track of the number of indices you need to access the element you want. The number of indices is equal to the number of dimensions in the array. Now that we have a basic understanding of multidimensional arrays, let's look at how we can iterate through them. The most common way to iterate through a multidimensional array is by using nested loops. The outer loop is used to iterate through the rows, and the inner loop is used to iterate through the columns. So here's an example of how to iterate through a two-dimensional array. So this code creates a two-dimensional array named matrix, and the 2 nested for loops are used to iterate through each element in the array. The first loop uses the variable I to keep track on the row, and the second loop uses the variable j to keep track of the column. The outer loop is executed matrix.length times, so this is amount of times, and this is the number of rows in the array. And the inner loop is executed the following amount of times, which is the number of columns in each row. So in this example, the first iteration of the outer loop would have I equal to 0, and the inner loop will iterate through the first row of the matrix, printing out each element in that row. The second iteration of the outer loop would have I equal to 1, and the inner loop would iterate through the second row of the matrix, printing out each element in that row. And this process continues until all rows have been processed. So in conclusion, multidimensional arrays can be a useful tool in representing and processing data, and the nested loop approach is a straightforward and efficient way to iterate through them. So let's run the program and see the output. Okay, so we can see that the matrix is pretty printed and as we expected. So that's it for the lesson. Thank you for attention and see you on the next lesson. Bye.